Joining me in the studio is Marwan Bashara, Al Jazeera's senior political analyst. Marwan, what do you make of this continued tough talk from Putin that seems to be escalating a bit? He is accusing Turkey of almost being in bed with the terrorists, as he calls them. What do you make of it? What is he up to?
Look, Rachel, this is, in 3 words, Putin's Bush moment. The Russian president was basically taking a page out of the former American president's playbook.
How so?
Either with us or with the terrorists. Basically accusing Turkey of, in some ways, supporting terrorism, invoking the words Allah, to talk about even harmony within Russia. Well, of course, the Chechens would disagree with that, about any such religious harmony. But certainly this was the bravado that we saw from George W. Bush. This is sort of the kinds of speeches we've heard after 9/11 that does not back down, does not back out, speaks only why they hate us and why we need to do what we need to do, because these are Russian values, that these are attacks on Russian values. You know, we've heard that before from the American president. And it seems like, again, like the former American president, we have the sort of not backing out, not backing down, but rather continuing with the war of words, but backing it with military escalations in the like of Syria.
To what end? Why?
Well, certainly, President Putin is taking a sort of an insecure approach to foreign policy. He says that he actually called them they. They are trying to destabilize us. They have destabilized the Middle East. They encroach on us. He feels that NATO, for example, as of yesterday's announcements that Montenegro will be joining as a 29th member of NATO, is an attack on Russia, is an offense against Russia. He thinks that destabilizing the Middle East and the indirect support or the direct support of terrorism does threaten Russia. So he gave us a vision of a man that lives in a world of threats, of terrorism, and why Russia is going to have to lead the war against terror. Does not that sound like George W. Bush?
Okay. In fact, he said this. He said countries should not apply double standards on terror or use terrorist groups for their own needs. Is he doing that? Is he using terrorist groups for his own needs by inserting himself in Syria?
Well, look, most of the world agrees on a simple definition of terrorism. Terrorism is not about who, it's about what. It's not about the actor, it's about the act itself. Terrorism is the use of, or the threat of use of force against civilians for political ends. It's to terrorize other peoples in order to get your will, right? Can anyone in the world look me in the face and say, can any Russian official look me in the face and say that the Assad regime has not used force against civilians for political ends? Isn't President Putin supporting a regime that basically exercises and supports terrorism within Syria itself? And yet he does it in the pretext or under the pretext of fighting terror.
But he exactly, he has said that the reason he is there is because of ISIL. Do you reject that?
No, not at all. If only he was bombing ISIL. For the last several weeks, President Putin has concentrated his bombing on the western part of Syria in order to prep up President Assad. So basically, much of the bombing of Syria was directed against those opposition groups that sprung out of the revolution 4 years ago or 5 years ago, and they have been since then resisting a dictatorship that basically is responsible for 80% of the civilian deaths in Syria. So if only President Putin was focusing on ISIL, you know, some people would say, look, he's part of an international coalition, whatever. Remains to be seen whether bombing is good or not, but that would have been the case.